Many people live in the old red houses on New York's West Side. These people are always moving from place to place. They stay in one furnished room for a short time and then move to another. They are called transients because they never stay anywhere for long. They don't have real homes and can carry everything they own in a small box. To them, gardens and flowers are not important. They only think of flowers as decorations for hats. These old houses have been home to thousands of people over the years, and each house has many stories to tell. Some of these stories might not be interesting, but it's hard not to feel that some invisible part of the people who lived there remains behind. Their bodies may be gone, but their spirits seem to stay. One evening, a young man arrived in this area. He carried a bag and went from house to house, ringing doorbells. At the 12th house, he stopped and wiped the dust off his face. He rang the bell, and it sounded far away, like it was deep underground. The woman who owned the house opened the door. She was short and heavy, with a strange look about her, as if she had come out of the ground, hungry for something. The young man asked, "Do you have a room I can stay in for the night?" "Come in," the woman said in a soft voice. For some reason, the young man didn't like her tone. "I have a room on the 3rd floor at the back. Would you like to see it?" He followed her upstairs. The halls were dimly lit, and the floor covering was old and torn. There were places in the walls that might have once held plants, but they were long dead. The air was heavy and smelled bad. "This is the room," the woman said in her thick, soft voice. "It's a nice room. People usually like it. Last summer, I rented it to some very nice people who paid on time. Theater people often stay here. The gas is working, and there's plenty of space for your clothes. If you don't take it, someone else will." "Do many theater people live here?" the young man asked. "Oh, yes," she said. "They come and go. Theater people don't stay in one place for long." The young man decided to rent the room for a week. He paid the woman and said he planned to rest there. As the woman was leaving, he asked a question he had already asked many times before. "Do you remember a young woman named Eloise Vashner? She's a theater singer. She's medium height, thin, with red gold hair and a small dark mark near her left eye." The woman shook her head. "No, I don't remember her. Theater people change their names all the time, and they come and go so quickly." The answer was the same as always. No, the young man had been searching for Eloise for 5 months. He asked everyone he met in the theater world if they had seen her. Every evening, he went to theaters, both the famous ones and the small, shabby ones he feared finding her in. But she seemed to have disappeared. He was sure she was still somewhere in the city, but New York was like a huge machine, always moving and changing. People were here one day and gone the next. The room he rented felt strangely warm and welcoming, as if it were promising him rest. There was a bed, two old chairs, a small mirror, and pictures on the walls. The floor had a colorful rug in the middle, surrounded by dust. The wallpaper was bright, but it looked out of place. The fireplace had bits of cloth hanging above it, but they didn't make the room look better. The young man had seen similar rooms many times before. He noticed signs of the people who had stayed there before him. The floor was worn in front of the mirror, showing that women had stood there. Small fingerprints on the walls suggested children had lived there. A larger mark on the wall made him think someone had thrown something in anger. The name Marie was scratched into the mirror. The room seemed cold and broken. It was not a real home. It looked like the people who had lived there hated the room because it reminded them of what they were missing. A true home. In their anger, they had damaged it. The young man sat quietly, thinking about these things. Around him, he heard noises from the other rooms. Someone laughing, a loud woman's voice. People gambling. A woman singing to her baby. Someone crying. From above, there was music. Doors opened and closed, trains roared past, and an animal cried out in the night. The house smelled sick and old, like it was dying. Suddenly, the room was filled with the strong, sweet smell of a flower called mignonette. The scent was so powerful, it felt like a person had entered the room. The young man stood up and called out, "What is it?" as if someone had spoken to him. He turned around, searching. The smell surrounded him. He opened his arms as if to embrace it. For a moment, he was confused. How could a smell feel like a voice? He was sure she had been in this room. He began looking for something, anything, that might have belonged to Eloise. He searched the corners, got down on his hands and knees, and looked carefully at the floor. He found small things left behind by other women. Hairpins, bits of cloth, a book, but nothing of hers. The smell of mignonette was all around him, but he couldn't see her. He felt she was near, but he could not find any sign of her. He ran downstairs to the landlady. "Who stayed in my room before me?" he asked. She replied, "The last people were Mr. and Mrs. Mooney, theater people. Before them, there was a man who didn't pay his rent. Before him, Mrs. Crowder and her children. That's all I remember from the past year." Disheartened, the young man returned to the room. The sweet smell of mignonette had disappeared. The room was now cold and lifeless again. He sat for a long time, then began stuffing pieces of cloth into the cracks around the windows and doors to block the air. He turned off the gas light, started the gas again, and laid down on the bed, letting the gas fill the room. That night, the landlady, Mrs. Purdy, sat downstairs with her friend Mrs. McCool. I rented the third-floor back room to a young man tonight, Mrs. Purdy said. Did you tell him? Asked Mrs. McCool. Rooms are for renting, Mrs. Purdy said. I didn't tell him. You're right. If people knew someone had died in that room, they wouldn't rent it. But we have to earn a living, said Mrs. McCool. That poor girl who killed herself in there last week. Such a pretty little thing.